Welcome to this IUN Community Garden session, Companion Planting. Our presenter today is Dolly Foster. Dolly Foster is a landscape horticulturalist and has been a master gardener for 22 years, an Indiana Accredited Horticulturist for 20, and a certified arborist since 2008. For the past 22 years, Dolly has been presenting lectures on many garden topics. She spent several years as an adjunct faculty member in the Joliet Junior College Agriculture Horticultural Department and 18 years in the parks and recreation industry as staff horticulturalist for 2 park districts. Dolly also managed the Oaklawn Community Garden. Dolly has been butterfly gardening from the very beginning of her gardening career. Her passion has led her to raise monarch and swallowtail butterflies, which she has done for the past 15 years. Her garden at home has been a monarch way station since 2011. In addition, Dolly has a new position as horticulture assistant with the Purdue Extension Lake County, and we're very glad to have her with us today. Thank you, Dolly.
Thank you, everybody. Thanks, Amanda. Thanks for inviting me back. Happy to be here. Okay, so companion planting. First of all, I have to present our Purdue information. Purdue Equal Opportunity Statement. Purdue University prohibits discrimination against any member of the university community on the basis of race, religion, color, sex, age, nationality, or ancestry, genetic information, marital status, parental status, sexual orientation, gender identity, and expression, disability, or status as a veteran. So we are an equal opportunity hub for all things. We're going to talk about companion planting, just a little bit of background on this lecture. I wrote this I think about 24 years ago when I first became a master gardener and I started a garden club. And one of the garden club members asked for this. So not that I've been practicing companion planting for years, but I have been kind of reading about it and some practice because I'm not a big vegetable gardener at home. But we're going to talk about different aspects of companion planting from different angles. So I think that's going to make it even more interesting that it's not just straightforward vegetable gardening. So what is companion planting? This is using nature's built-in abilities to enhance the growth of plants. And it's, all the plants in the world and the animals and the insects, they have a very complicated relationship as a large web of life. And so companion planting is a part of this. So by practicing companion planting and other types of natural gardening in your own garden, you're going to be bringing a balanced ecosystem to your property and your garden. And this allows nature to do its job. And what is nature's job? Nature's job is to fight it out with each other. And so by planting and attracting beneficial insects, you will be fighting all of what we conceive of as bad insects in the vegetable garden, especially. So many plants lots of plants have compounds in their stems, their roots, their leaves that benefit their neighbors, that fight off the pests. And usually we call those volatile oils. And that, think about how smelly basil is, or mint, or lantana, things like that. So companion planting could also be called plant associations. This is where the plants can't get up and move, so they can't alter their whole environment, but they can alter the environment in the immediate region around their roots. So this means chemically, biologically, they can alter their environment by, being a very smelly plant that has some kind of volatile oil that nobody else likes. That will keep animals away. And physically means plants have thorns and things like that will fight off or deter a pest, more likely deter. And their neighbors around these plants that have these attributes are either benefited or they're stunted. And this is especially seen in the vegetable garden. So some words about this. Again, this topic has a lot of gray area. A lot of it is just lore. Not a lot of it is being studied scientifically. It's not a huge area of study in the science world, but there are some people probably working on it. So this is a really big gray area of things that people have observed and passed down. And so we're going to try and present this in kind of a black and white way, but I don't want you to get anxious about your garden and that you don't have the two right plants next to each other. Oh my gosh, neither of them are going to grow, because as gardeners, we know that's not true. Plants can grow without their companions around, and they will do just fine. It's just that pairing certain plants up and intercropping in a vegetable garden can benefit the garden, and you get more food out of your garden. So these methods are things that can just help and enhance your gardening experience. These are not hard and fast rules. Um, and I don't want you to get caught up in that. You know, if you've ever been in one of my lectures before, you know that I don't ever want someone to start gardening and learning about gardening and thinking that if they don't do something that someone says, their garden is going to fail, and you get really anxious about it and then you stop gardening. Because I have seen that happen, and I don't want that to happen. So these are suggestions, they are helpful hints. This is lore that has been sent down, you know, generation, and take it for what it is. It's advice. Okay. So there's three ways to defend against pests in a garden. And here are some examples of that. So chemically, legumes capture nitrogen from the atmosphere and they put it into the soil, and that benefits the legume plant, and it also benefits plants around it because it's adding nitrogen to the soil that plants need. Legumes are all of the plants in the bean family, and that goes from the common string bean and snap bean in the garden all the way to native plants like purple prairie clover is a legume, and Baptisia australis is a legume. Asparagus releases asparagine. That's a chemical, of course, released by its roots, and it deters other plants around it. So when you plant asparagus, when we planted it at the pantry garden in Oak Lawn, we planted it in two raised beds by themselves, and they were very happy. They don't really want to be around anybody else. It's a little bit like a sunflower. And then juglone, of course, is released by black walnut trees. And if you've ever had a black walnut tree in your yard, you will know that there are certain plants that just absolutely will not grow underneath it. And it's because the roots exude this chemical, and this chemical does affect a fair number of plants. And I would think that it would affect plants that are not native to North America more than plants that are, although there are walnut trees in Europe, so in Asia. Let's talk about physically, how plants defend physically. So plants can play off each other's structures. So for example, if you plant carrots, lettuce, and onions in the same bed or in rows that are very close together, they are compatible because their roots are all in three different layers of the soil. Lettuce is really shallow. Carrot is going to go straight down, of course. And then onions are kind of in the middle, and they're kind of a clumped up fibrous root system. And so they can grow spatially together very well in the same row or rows put together. So they don't compete with each other. Defense biologically is how a plant will repel or attract insects. So this is a very, very short list because we're going to go into this a little bit more in depth later on. But alliums, marigolds, peppermint, parsley, basil, these are all good beneficial insect attracting plants, but they are also smelly enough that they will repel certain small animals and sometimes deer. Okay, so let's move on. So the advantages of companion planting are of course known by what we've learned from our grandparents and great grandparents about gardening, that putting certain plants together increases vigor and flavor of plants. They benefit from their neighbors. Also companion planting, if it's organic planting, which it should be, because the whole reason why you're doing this companion planting is to get better plants, healthier plants, better vegetables, tastier vegetables, and then not having to use any kind of pesticides. And so it provides clean material for your compost bin. which is a really great benefit because you need fresh compost every year for your vegetable garden. Other things that companion planting does, it discourages and confuses damaging insects without losing your beneficials. So again, we're going to go a little bit in depth later. Provides food and habitat for beneficial insects. 7 main practices of companion planting are interplanting, symbiotic nitrogen fixing, biochemical pest suppression, trap cropping, beneficial habitats, and then security through diversity and integrated pest management. We're going to touch on all of those. So intercropping I find fascinating, and we did a lot of this at the Park District in our pantry garden, and I was so pleased at how successful it was. So think of this as a season extending, space saving way to structure your vegetable garden. Square foot gardening falls under this category. You can mix tall sun-loving plants with short plants that need shade. So growing things like lettuce under other plants that grow a little bit taller, like the onions in the picture on the bottom, or even plants that are even taller than that, can shade the lettuce. And so the lettuce will not bolt as fast as normal, as if they were just in the sun all the time. Dill is a good thing to pair with lettuce. Spinach and peas grow well together because of this. And then sunflowers and melons are good because the sunflowers kind of shade those melons. Intercropping, the core idea of this is planting 2 different crops in one row or one small space. Let me go back to square foot gardening for just 1 second, though. You can see in this photo on the top of the slide that the person that owns this garden put a little bit of string in a grid pattern, and each square in the grid is 12 inches square, 12 inch by 12 inch. And then there is a corresponding, there's charts all over the internet that you can find for square foot gardening, or you can go straight to the original book, and it will tell you how many vegetable plants of each species can go into square foot. So down in the bottom corner, you have 1 pepper plant. You'll have 1 tomato plant. In the onion box, I think there's like 6 onions. So if they're like spring onions, it could probably be 12. So square foot gardening is something that you can do if all you can do is put in a 4x8 bed in your backyard or behind your condo, or somewhere else you have very, very small amount of space. You can get some kind of harvest out of that space. And if you follow these kinds of guidelines for square foot gardening, you'll get a little bit of something, a little bit of everything, depending on what you plant, of course. So intercropping is a little bit bigger. The core idea is this companion planting thing where you're going to put 2 different kind of plants together that benefit each other, that grow well next to each other. I think at the pantry garden, we used to plant beans that went over an arch. The rest of the bed was either Swiss chard or beets. And the beets we would get 2 harvests out of. We tried to get 3. We could never get a really good 3rd harvest, but you can get 2 harvests of beets. Sometimes you can get a 3rd harvest if you do radishes, 1, 2, 3 harvests of radishes. So that's safe space. That's space saving, instead of using up an entire bed full of bush beans, which are really good producing plants. We put the bean vines up and over an arch that went over the walkways of the garden. I think I might have some pictures of the garden in here. I'm not sure. But it's mostly a space saving method of planting. So plant combination that's planted to push a pest away or somewhere else. This is called push and pull. You can also use certain plants for trap cropping. Yes. And one of those plants that is a trap plant is going to be nasturtium. They're a really good trap plant for squash bugs. and squash borers. Okay, let's talk about the three sisters. This is probably one of the most common and successful combinations of companion planting. This method has been used by indigenous peoples all over North America for eons. I'm not even going to say centuries. It's been eons. It's been thousands of years. They probably use a tradition like this in Africa also for people that are not nomadic. So the Three Sisters is pretty cool. What you do is you build a mound, and on that mound, you're going to plant corn in the middle. And then 2 weeks later, you're going to plant beans. And then 2 weeks after that, you plant your squash. And the reason for this is because the corn has to have a chance to germinate before you put those beans in. And the corn has to get a head start before the beans, because the beans are going to climb up the corn. And the corn is a very, very hungry plant. And so the beans will put nitrogen into the soil for the corn. And then the squash will act as a living mulch around the base of the plants. And because the squash plants like to be a little high and dry, planting the whole thing in a mound benefits the squash. Okay. I think that's it. But this can be reproduced in a flat bed, a raised bed, very easily. So there's no reason why you guys can't do this at home, except for the fact that you're going to be sacrificing the corn to the squirrels. All right, so here's another illustration of Three Sisters that I really like this illustration. Shows a little bit more practically what it's actually going to look like. You can see in the photograph that when you plant this, you're going to plant in a circle. You're going to plant a lot of beans around that corn, and you're going to plant a lot of corn. And then there's only a couple of squash plants. You only put in a couple because, of course, they get gigantic. But you can see, like in the top of the illustration on the right, traditionally when they would do this, they would build the mound, but they would put like some kind of organic matter inside the mound to act as fertilizer for the starter plants. And so that would be a fish carcass or whatever kind of organic matter that they had on hand to use. Okay, so symbiotic nitrogen fixing. So again, these are plants from the bean family. They attract nitrogen from the atmosphere. Our atmosphere is mostly nitrogen, and it fixes it into the soil for their own use and their neighbors' use. Of course, this is the Three Sisters. All right, so biochemical pest suppression. So some plants exude their chemicals from the roots and suppress or repel pests. For example, Mexican marigolds and gem marigolds. So those of you who are gardeners, I know that at some point in your life, someone has said to you, you need to plant marigolds in your garden to keep nematodes out of your garden, to deter the nematodes, to deter other pests. Well, it's not any marigold. I hate to tell you that. It's not any marigold. You need to have, what I was taught was that the marigolds, like Mexican marigold, which is, I believe, a form of tarragon, and then the old-fashioned heritage gem collection of marigolds, which this photograph is one. So the gem marigolds are a tiny little dime-sized flower on top of big ferny foliage that's about 2 feet wide and about a foot tall. And those marigold plants smell like you are in an entire field of marigolds, but it's only one plant. So they have more of that chemical in them that does the deterring job than the other modern hybrids of marigolds. So if you're looking for that specific purpose, I would say seek out or request these kind of marigolds from the local growers. Get them to grow them for next year. Growing them from seed, I've not always been successful, but I've not always failed either. So just keep that in mind. If you If you want something from a garden center, go ahead and request it. See if they will be able to supply it for the next year. But they are very, very smelly little marigolds, and they are always filled with tiny pollinators all summer long. So it's a really nice little plant. Asparagus and tomatoes together. You can put asparagus and tomatoes nearby each other because the aspergine repels tomato pests like tomato hornworm. You don't want to put them together, I think, in the same bed. You might be able to, if you're doing rows in the ground, you may be able to put, a row of tomatoes next to your permanent asparagus bed because, of course, asparagus is a perennial vegetable that just gets better and better every year. And so you could do that and they would benefit from that. The tomatoes would benefit. Another way of doing this deterrence is trap cropping. And so this is plants that attract pests away from the crops that they are planted nearby. So garlic and marigolds, you will have less thrips. If you plant cabbage and mustard, you will have less flea hoppers. And flea hoppers and leaf hoppers are insects that carry diseases. They're insects that will bite and chew and suck the sap out of some other plant that has a disease, and then they will carry that to another species of plant. Chervil with anything will deter slugs. So chervil is a really good one for slugs. And nasturtium plus any vegetable equals less aphids and Colorado beetles and squash beetles, I believe. So it's a good one. So it attracts them away from your crop that you want to grow. Beneficial habitats. This is where growing flowers in a vegetable garden becomes very apparent that it's super important. And it's not just important to bring honeybees in to do the work of your of the pollination of your vegetable plants, because there are certain plants like tomatoes that can be self-pollinated. They're better pollinated by bumblebees, but they can be self-pollinated. So beneficial insects, if they're attracted into your vegetable garden, they're going to reproduce in your garden if they have the food in the form of pollen to eat when their prey insect hasn't arrived yet. So think about aphids and ladybugs. If you have the plant that the adult ladybugs like to eat the pollen from while they're waiting for the aphids to show up, then they'll stay, they'll mate, they'll reproduce, they'll lay eggs in your garden. And then when that next generation of ladybugs are emerging, maybe that's when the aphids have showed up. So then your garden is ready and you don't have to do anything like release ladybugs. The ladybugs that we release, they are not native ladybugs. If you've ever had ladybugs in your house over the winter and you hate them, those are the ladybugs that you buy. They're the same species. But I do want to remind you that only 5% of insects are harmful to crops. The good bugs vastly outnumber the bad ones. And so be familiar with the life stages of certain garden pests or garden insects so that you know when you see the larval stage of a hoverfly and green lacewing. So let's talk about that. Hoverflies are a fly that does pollination. You can see in the photograph of the adult, the wings resemble a bee's wings, but also you're like, wait a second, is that really a bee? I don't know. Look at those eyes. Those aren't bee eyes. Those are fly eyes. So if you ever see one of these in the garden and you're kind of asking yourself these questions, it's probably a hoverfly, and they're also called syrphid flies. But the larva is what you really want to attract to the garden. You want those adult hoverflies to lay eggs in your garden because the larva can eat hundreds of aphids during the time that it is a larva before it transforms, metamorphoses into the adult. So the larva looks like a funny little slug with some little hard hairs on it. It's a funny looking little insect, and it's one of those insects that kind of surprises you when you see it. Like, oh my gosh, what is that thing? Should I kill it? That's what I thought the first time I saw a ladybug larva, and I'll show you that in a second. Green lacewings are another really good insect to have in the garden. They are not only pollinators, but the adult The adult green lacewing does eat some insects, but the larva is a voracious eater of aphids and other small soft-bodied insects that will eat your roses and eat your vegetable plants and things like that. And the larva of the green lacewing really reminds me of like some kind of horrible ocean monster from some movie. And I can never quite put my finger on it, but it just really seems like that. It seems like something that would come right out of the ocean. They're very creepy looking. They're kind of that brown and white and yellow mottled color. So, what I would suggest for you to do if you're really going to get into this, um, is really start imprinting on your brain what these life stages look like for insects, and start to realize how important it is for us to recognize the life cycle and the life stages of insects, because they look really different from the adults. And if we do not recognize the larva, we run the risk of wiping them out in our garden when they're actually there to help us. So, speaking of ladybug larva, this little guy in the middle that looks like a tire tread that ran over a bag of oranges, that's ladybug larva. And there are many, many different species of ladybugs that are indigenous to North America, but then we have a few that are not specifically native, but they've been released. And they all sort of are black with these funny little legs, and then they have the orange spots on them. But I always remember that this is a ladybug larva because it looks like a tire tread that ran over a bag of oranges. And it has always stuck with me. And the first time I ever saw one in my garden, I had to go to like a children's insect book that I had bought for my nieces and nephews. And when I saw that what I had was ladybug larva, I nearly cried, because that was the moment that I knew that organically managing my garden was working. The ladybugs were coming, they had food, they mated, they laid eggs, and I had the larva in the garden because of that. So whatever I was doing it correctly, and it was very, very satisfying. Um, you will see that there's a stink bug adult on the right side of your screen. Not all stink bugs are bad. They're not terrible in the garden. They're not great inside your house. And some stink bugs, like the brown marmoted stink bug, which is not native, it has been introduced accidentally. The brown marmoted can be problematic, and you'll know that when you have those because they're big, they're brown, and they sort of have spikes on their sides instead of being smooth. And the nymph looks like a ladybug, so I want you to recognize that. The stink bug nymph has that beautiful tortoise shell sort of pattern on its body when it's in its larval stage. They do eat some soft-bodied insects like aphids, and I've never really like looked up and read a whole lot about stink bugs because I just don't have a whole lot of them in my yard. So I've never really studied up on them very much, but I try not to kill them. Um, so definitely try and recognize those larval stages. So let's talk about security through diversity. Um, Diversity is really important in a garden. If we think about a monoculture like a cornfield or even a very nicely cared for front lawn, that monoculture is at risk for one or more diseases or pests to come in. And because it's a monoculture, the whole field or the whole lawn could be wiped out by a pest because there's too much of one thing too close together, which is why modern agriculture has fallen into this herbicide and pesticide, garbage pail that they have, doing the best that they can to not lose their crops and their livelihood, while unnecessarily poisoning the people around it. So, and that's a totally different subject that I'm getting off topic, but that's a really serious topic to talk about is pesticide use in farming. It can be problematic. But I want you to think about your garden. So security through diversity, we're mostly talking about vegetable gardens, and we're talking about flower gardens, natural gardens, native gardens. Um, the general idea of security through diversity is you are going to camouflage, confuse, and repel the pests with a smell that a plant will exude, or some kind of biting or repellent juices, or thorns, or some other attribute from the plant that will um, make the pest go away. So this is combining species of plants in your garden where you attract the beneficial insects and you drive off the pests. And you're going to mix different cultivars of the same vegetable together. So mixing different kinds of peppers together and mixing different kinds of tomatoes together. Maybe some are hybrids and they are repellent to one disease, but you have heirlooms and they're kind of susceptible to the disease. And so, maybe you sacrifice, you get a lot from that hybrid tomato, you get a lot of fruit, but the heirloom, you just kind of keep it around because they taste so good. But the diversity is important to have because maybe you just won't get that much of that disease if you have plants around the vulnerable one. That's kind of the idea. Again, monoculture plantings are prime targets for pests and disease. So IPM is a comprehensive approach to controlling insects, weeds, plant diseases, and with environmentally and economically sound practices. So IPM does not mean no chemicals. What it means is more monitoring and catching problems at the very beginning, so you do not have to use very many chemicals. Integrated pest management was invented in the 1970s. It's a agriculture practice with about 70 different points of what farmers do. As far as gardening goes, home gardening, IPM has 5 tenets to it. So the background is gardening practices that target the pest's vulnerabilities, prevent infestations. So as a result, your rescue treatments of chemicals are not in higher need until the pest problem becomes very critical. So, but I want you to pay attention to these 2 pictures down on below. The one down on the right, again, what is that? That is a ladybug larva. Everybody should be saying ladybug larva. It looks like a tire tread that ran over a bag of oranges. On the left-hand side, this is a very fascinating little insect. This is a parasitic wasp. So for me, as a person who raises monarch butterflies, this parasitic wasp is a really important one in my garden because she will come in and she will lay eggs in the body of the aphids that come and live on my milkweed plants. And they can clean up milkweed plants really quickly within just a few weeks if enough of them lay eggs in the aphids, because the aphids instantly die once the eggs are laid in them. And the wasp develops inside the aphid and then hatches out. And what you see are little brown dots all over the place. And those are called aphid mummies. There are a lot of different species of this type of parasitic wasp, many, many species. Some of them are specialized, some of them are generalists. Specialized meaning some only eat aphids or lay eggs in aphids, some only lay eggs in other insects. But this is part of our native bee collection, for lack of a better word in my mind right now. We have 400 different native bees in Indiana. There are about 20,000 species of bee in the world. There are more than just honeybees in the world, and bumblebees and carpenter bees, which are going crazy looking for nesting sites right now. But there are lots and lots of these little bees that bee is probably less than a quarter of an inch long. They're very, very small. We don't even see them. They don't have stingers. They're not interested in us. They want to drink nectar, eat pollen, and lay eggs. And they don't even really kind of recognize us as anything threatening to them. So, sorry, I thought there was 5 parts of integrated pest management. Maybe I only listed 4 because that's what's needed for vegetable gardening. So the first thing is genetic control. So choose disease-resistant plant varieties and place them well. And so this is directly associated with vegetable gardening. So look for hybrids for your vegetable garden that say that they are disease resistant. There's notations behind the cultivar names that show that it is verticillium resistant, or half a dozen other diseases that they have been bred to be resistant to this. So if leaf diseases and other kinds of viral diseases have been a problem in your vegetable garden for many years, time to start using genetic control to get a handle on your garden. Biologic control is releasing or attracting, which is even better, natural enemies and beneficial organisms. Again, things like the little parasitic wasp and the ladybugs. Cultural control is garden sanitation, weed, mow, hoe. Destroy your pest habitats. Limit places where slugs can live under, like rocks and tree trunks and things like that, and logs in the garden or on your property. Proper landscape design for your site and crop rotation, mulch to deter weeds. What else can I say? Weeding is probably key to this. I can give you an example here where cultural control is extremely important. Bearded iris are susceptible to the iris borer. So bearded iris needs to be split about every 5 years, and the bad iris rhizomes get thrown away. The ones that have already bloomed, they won't bloom again. So those get thrown away. When you plant your irises back into the ground, you do not mulch in between the rhizomes. The rhizomes should be up facing the sun. They should not have a lot of soil over them. And then no mulch. You can mulch in a ring around the outside of it, but no mulch in between. And then another thing that helps keep the iris borers at bay is to get out there about 5 times a year and clean out all the dead leaves in your iris patch. So that means leaves that have blown in and leaves that are dead on the plant, they should be pulled off. So I do have bearded iris, and sometimes I will go out over the winter and pull the dead leaves off maybe once or twice on a warm day because I just need to get outside. But that's cultural control. That's a really good example of cultural control. Another one is to prevent botrytis blight in peonies. Botrytis blight are the black spots all over your peony plants, if you do get that. And one of the ways to fight that, again, is sanitation in between the peony stems, and absolutely zero mulch in between the peony stems. Okay. Chemical control is insect pheromones and traps and organic or biologically produced toxins and pesticides and things like that. So that's like the last place you go. You're going to try and use these other things in your garden consistently. And the more you try and do biologic and cultural control, meaning attracting natural enemies and then keeping good garden sanitation, the more you do that and just integrate that into your gardening, it's going to just be second nature, and it won't be extra work. The most important part of IPM is the 5th step, and that is monitoring your garden. So look at your plants as you water, inspect as you harvest, take a walk in the garden at different times of the day, and observe the insects that are active at different parts of the day. Note the color changes in foliage, holes in leaves. Keep an eye on the number of beneficials in your garden, which is a sign that they have food, especially if you're seeing the larvae. So those are all parts of monitoring. And then let's getting into planning the garden. We have physical and spatial interactions again. For a vegetable garden, we're going to base physical spatial interactions on botanic plant families. You're going to put them together, or you're going to separate them. I'm going to show you a chart. Feeding families. There are certain plants that feed other plants. So garlic and turnips and carrots are feeding families. They're very hungry plants. And so you can put other things with them that feed them. Not in a really like literal way, but it's very minute. I'll say that. Performance families are making the neighbors grow better. So this is pole beans and lettuce. The pole beans giving shade to the lettuce makes the lettuce grow better, bigger, and longer. It keeps them from bolting. And if you don't know what bolting is, it's when in a vegetable garden, when it gets hot in the first part of the summer or late spring, when it gets hot really, really quickly, and your plants kind of freak out and all go to flower and try to make seeds, and then you can't eat the lettuce anymore or the cilantro or whatever other plant it is. So bolting is kind of a bummer when it happens. It's bok choy, kohlrabi, stuff like that is notorious for it, and so is cilantro. Pest fighting plant families, of course, we have marigolds and cucumbers together are a really good combination. Again, though, those old-fashioned marigolds like gem marigolds are the best. All right, so plant families are groups that are genetically related. They have similar growing needs and similar pest problems, so we want to separate them. So for example, peppers, tomatoes, eggplant, and potatoes. They are all in the same plant family. So this little chart is, each one of these little triangles is a different plant family. So we have the nightshade family at the top, that's Solanaceae. That is peppers, tomatoes, eggplant, and potatoes. So they're all susceptible to things like verticillium wilt. So that can be a really big problem in your garden. Mustard family is all the brassicas. Legumes is Fabaceae family. That is the old name for it. Then we have squash and onion, parsley, and so on and so forth. You can find this chart online still, I think. So this is just the most common plant families. Okay. Benefits of crop rotation are really, really important if you have a very large garden. We found that crop rotation really didn't benefit us or negatively affect us at the community garden in our pantry garden very much. But crop rotation in a small garden can help manage your soil fertility. It can reduce disease. It can reduce erosion. It can improve your soil's health. It can increase nutrients available for crops. And it can reducing disease, I think, is probably the number one benefit of crop rotation. So if you have had a tomato bed, like say you have raised beds, you have a bed that had tomatoes in it, the tomatoes got verticillium wilt or late blight, either one of those leaf diseases, then you want to put the tomatoes into another bed for the next year and keep them out of the first bed for a minimum of 5 years. So you have to rotate around. So hopefully you have enough raised beds to be able to do that, because you need to let those two diseases burn themselves out in the soil. So here's a crop rotation plan that I found online, which intrigued me. So you can start anywhere, but each plant follows the other. So after carrots, you're going to put in the Solanaceae family. Carrots can go in after corn. Corn can go in after beets. That's the goosefoot family. Beets can go into a bed after onions, and then so on and so forth. So this is kind of a good chart. And this was the first 3 years that we had the community garden beds. We did do this because I absolutely insisted on the crop rotation. And then I got overvoted not to do crop rotation anymore by my partner. And so, it just happens, whatever. But we did do this, and I thought it kept the late blight down on the tomatoes, in combination with us pruning our tomatoes pretty extensively. So performance families, these are plant families that make other plants taste better. So basils and tomatoes are probably the most common combination that you see. And basil also helps keep away some pests. And again, tomatoes and asparagus benefit each other. Beets can improve the production of onions if they're planted next to each other in rows, or in a scatter pattern in a bed. Like your plants don't have to be in rows if they're in a raised bed. They can be, you can have beets scattered, seeds scattered through a bed, and then you can scatter spring onions through the same bed with the beets. It doesn't have to always be in rows. Keep that in mind. It doesn't have to be. So some pest fighting species, this helps repel pests from attacking another plant of the group. So basil repels aphids, flies, mosquitoes, and mites. I plant basil all over my yard in pots around my patio and things like that to repel mosquitoes. Coriander repels aphids, nasturtium repels cucumber beetles, whitefly, and squash bugs. Marigolds repel nematodes. Toothache plant, which is called spilanthes, and it's a plant that I sell in my plant sale, repels aphids. So sometimes if I'm really on it in the spring, when I start seeing the milkweed come up in the garden, I will dig out a little area in front of that plant or next to the milkweed stems, as close as I can get, and put in a few toothache plants, because it really does kind of work. Like it doesn't repel all or 100% of the aphids, because if you have milkweed, there's thousands and thousands of them. But it does repel them. It does repel them. I always have less if I put them in. And I did some experiments a couple years ago where I put milkweed into a couple of big planter pots at my house with spilanthes in it. And I did have a vastly reduced number of aphids on those plants. So I think that this kind of stuff does work. Okay, so other things that repel insects are plants in the allium family. So these are all in the onion family, but these are all ornamental, well, save for two of them. So what we have up here on the top left-hand corner is Allium giganteum, which are the big, large, tall spring alliums, the ornamental onions. They're very popular with all different kinds of bee species, especially bumblebees. In the middle is, I think, if that's not, okay, so that's not nodding wild onion. The one in the middle on the top is one of the other ornamental onions that blooms later on in the summer. So for example, two varieties of that would be Pink Planets, Millennium was the first one that came out. And then I think there's Summer Beauty. So those are three examples of that. So these are the ones you would find in the ornamental landscape plant area of a garden center. The one next to it on the right, top right, is chives. And chives are okay, but chives, most people plant chives and then a few years later they really regret it because it has grown too big and they just hate them. So they do their job, they repel insect pests, but I just wanted to show you on this slide that there are many other allium plants that you can plant to repel insects. On the bottom left-hand corner is garlic. Garlic is surprisingly easy to grow in this area. If you want to try your hand at growing garlic, you'll plant the bulbs in the fall just like you would a tulip. And you plant them until the next June. You grow them until the next June, rather. And for this area, we grow hardneck. There is hardneck and softneck, and we grow hardneck here in this area, in this part of the country. In the center on the bottom is a native plant called nodding wild onion. It is one of, I think, 3 or 5 species of native onion. This is the only one I've had any experience with, and I just really love it. I have it all over my garden. It reseeds a little bit, but it's not a pest. It's very, very easy to move or pull out if you don't want the plant, if it goes somewhere where you don't want it. But it's a really great plant for pollinators and to keep pests out. I don't like squirrels digging in my garden, so I started planting the giant allium and the other ornamental alliums to keep the squirrels from digging in the garden, and it's worked. They don't do it nearly as often. The onion on the right side on the bottom is called Egyptian wild walking onion. And this is the top of what you would conceivably think of as a flower stem. It's called a scape. And at the top of the scape, instead of flowers, we get something called bulbules. These are baby onion plants. So what happens is that this is really tall. It's about 2.5 feet tall, and it gets really, really heavy and it falls over. And then this cluster of bulbs just kind of sits on the top of the soil, but they root and it starts a whole nother cluster of the onions. The onions can be eaten at this stage, like a spring onion. You can cook them like a spring onion. So they're definitely edible. So that's just a little taste of what's out there in the onion world to add to your garden to repel bad insects and nasty insects and squirrels. It works surprisingly well. Again, here we have nasturtium, sweet basil, purple basil, any kind of basil is really nice. Borage is a good one for repelling some insects. Spilanthes is toothache plant that's down in the middle. Cilantro works surprisingly well for mosquitoes and other things again. And then here's a special class of plant that is one that attracts beneficial insects. And the reason why they attract beneficial insects is because these plants grow and produce copious amounts of pollen. And that is what the adults of these insects want to eat if they don't have their prey. So lacewings, ladybugs, hoverflies will munch on the pollen of these plants. It's a good protein source for them. They don't necessarily drink a lot of the nectar, but they will eat the pollen and then mate and lay their eggs in your garden. So have a patch of yarrow, put in alyssum in the spring, let it reseed itself. If you have Queen Anne's lace, just have a little bit of Queen Anne's lace. It's a biennial, so it's not a forever plant unless you let it reseed. And if you do have it, don't let all of it reseed. Only let a couple of flower heads reseed into your garden. Don't keep all of them because then you'll have too much. You'll have too much. Some other beneficial insect attractors, we have New England aster and goldenrod. Both of these plants are what we now call keystone plants. Keystone plants are plants that feed more insect species than any other plants in the environment around them. And so this is part of the ecoregions identifier. We're ecoregion 8. And this kind of all comes out of Doug Tallamy, Homegrown National Park, that kind of thing. The keystone plants are identified in their research. And there is more to life than Canadian goldenrod. I sell 6 different types of goldenrod that don't spread around your yard like Canadian goldenrod. So if you're interested in that, New England aster also, and all the other asters are also under the keystone plant umbrella. Parsley is another beneficial insect attractor. It has flowers in its second year. It is a biennial, but in its first year, it will be food for eastern swallowtail butterflies, but it is also smelly enough that it can repel some insects and some little critters, except maybe rabbits. So Amanda is going to send you all a handout that is going to have I think a 3 or 4 page chart that is going to look just like this on the screen. The name of the veggie plant down the left side, their friends next to them, so who they like to be planted with, the herbs they like to be planted with, who they don't like to be planted with, their enemies, and then special benefit to the environment or the garden. So let's take beans as our example here. Beans like to be planted near cabbage and carrots and corn, cucumbers, tomatoes, they're okay. Squash, they're okay. Herbs they like to be planted next to are borage and marigold. The borage and the marigold probably repel some pest. And then they do not like to be planted near chives or garlic or leeks. So nothing in the onion family. Beans don't like to be planted near them. And they don't like being planted near fennel. It probably affects the flavor. Beans are nitrogen fixing plant and reduces the number of armyworms in the garden. So that is their special benefit to the garden. Okay, so you're going to get a really large chart of this with all different kinds of vegetable plants on it. And I did this research years ago, and it was pretty extensive research. If we want to take another quick example, we can talk about pumpkins. Bean, corn, and radish are their friends. They do not like potatoes, so you don't put pumpkins and potatoes together, but they don't mind being around nasturtium, marjorams, or mints. Okay, so that's kind of the companion planting thing. This is all based on observation. These are good slides to take photos of right now. I'm going to run through these really quickly. So if you have your phone out, you can take pictures, but you're going to be able to see this on YouTube also, so you can look this up a little bit later. So growing cucumbers, their friends are sunflowers, and foes are things like sage and rue. Cucumbers are finicky, I guess. Broccoli has many, many friends, but it also has many foes. So broccoli is kind of like, could be a really narrow area where you're going to put it, or maybe you wouldn't put it into a big, huge bed with a lot of different things. Maybe broccoli wouldn't grow very well in a square foot gardening situation. Carrots really don't have very many foes. They really don't like being near dill, which is in the same plant family. So is parsnips, and so is parsley. So they compete for the nutrients underground, and so they don't grow well together. Even though they're in the same plant family, it's probably too much competition for nutrients. And then squash, they really don't like potatoes and pumpkins, but squash grow happily with beans and corns and other squash. So you can plant, actually, I should change that. When you are growing squash and zucchini and cucumbers, they should not be mixed with other squash, zucchini, and cucumbers because of the risk of cross-pollination and their fruit coming out to be some kind of weirdo squash that tastes terrible. So when we say foes of squash and zucchini are pumpkins, that is the reason why. We do not want them to cross-pollinate and make some kind of like weird pumpkin squash that tastes terrible. So squash actually should not be on the friends list there. Growing potatoes is really easy, but they do have a lot of things they don't like growing next to. And it could just because of root volume. It could be something that the faux plants put into the soil that they don't respond well to, but they obviously can be grown with many, many other plants. All right, fighting weeds, we're running out of time, so we're not going to be able to get through everything. I do want to say that with fighting weeds, when the soil's left bare, weeds will take over. So never allow Mother Nature to be naked. That's what I've been taught. Plant your plants closer together. Plant more plants in a bed. It may mean that you have to fertilize with an organic fertilizer a little bit more, or mulch, and you'll be able to mulch less. But planting more plants together and shading the soil is really important. These plants are good plants for bees. This is another good one to take a photo of. Things like chamomile and yarrow. Let's see. Dill, cosmos, and probably borage. Those are going to be plants that have lots and lots of pollen that the little tiny beneficial wasps really like. So that's why those are important. But the other ones are good for nectar, just to attract the pollinators in, and then they'll stick around in your vegetable garden. Some styles of vegetable gardening. Just want to go through this really quick. Here we have a gardener who put their beds out in their front yard. Why not? That's becoming more and more common. It's unless you are using your front yard for something specific, I see it as wasted space, even in my own yard. It's just wasted space. I thought these were really nice beds made with 4x4 timbers. As far as timbers go, timbers are not preserved with arsenic anymore. So most of the treated timbers are rated to be safe for vegetables. But if you're not comfortable with that, then grow in cedar wood. Use cedar or some other material. This is a really beautiful front yard. I don't know where this is, but this garden pops up on the internet every once in a while, and it's an absolutely beautiful vegetable garden right along the street. I don't know how they feel about their neighbors taking vegetables out of their front yard, but I'm sure that happens. Maybe they don't mind. This is a woman's garden that I knew in Plainfield, Illinois. This was her front yard. She worked this garden for many, many years until her health, because of her health, she had to sell this house and move to Arizona. And she had this vegetable garden out here for many years, and she gave the food away to food pantries and also used it for her family. So she gave away a lot. These are two more shots from her garden. Her name is Shauna Coronado, and she's a garden author. If you wanted to look her up, you could. She writes some really interesting books. Other styles, this is a really old-fashioned style of garden. I think that the top half is the garden part. I think somewhere this got mixed up. It's not looking right. But anyway, this is how gardens used to be. Have wandering paths through them. They don't all have to be grid systems, but having the wandering paths are really pretty. This is a portager garden. That means there's 4 squares, 4 corners. It's very, very French. This is mostly used for herb gardens, but you could use it for vegetables also. There's no reason you can't. Square foot gardening again. Those glass domes over those plants are called cloches, and those are put over plants to keep the heat in and to protect from frost, and they are over squash plants, at least the one in the front is, to encourage those seeds to germinate and to protect the plants from cold at the beginning of the summer or spring. So building healthy soil, just keep composting. And use cover crops in your garden if you can. Plant your crops closer together. Build your soil up with compost and protect it. Don't walk on it, especially when your garden soil is wet. Do not walk on it. That's very important. Spring prep, get out there and clean up your garden and lay down cardboard to smother weeds if you are having a big weed problem. Cardboard with a really deep layer of mulch over the top, like 6 inches, is very effective for killing weeds, smothering weeds, and also for killing lawn for a new planting bed. These are some upcoming events here at the Extension and other places. The night shift, nighttime pollinators and moon gardens is on May 8th, and that lecture is here at the Extension. You can call the Extension to get information about how to sign up for it. You have to sign up to be here because we only have so many seats in our big room. The Lake County Master Gardener plant sale is May 10th. The Wild Ones Native plant sale is May 3rd at Lake Etta. The Lake County Master Gardener sale on May 10th is at the Lake County Lake County. Oh God, I just lost the word. I hate when this happens. The Lake County Fairgrounds. And then the Lake County Master Gardener Walk is going to be Sunday, June 29th. So keep an eye out for that. And my plant sale at my home starts on May 30th to June 1st. You can get the plant sale list at hortforyou.net. That's my website. And then building a spiral herb garden is May 19th. And Amanda can probably tell us a little bit more about that because I think that's her program. And I think that's all I have for you guys today. Anybody have any questions?
Thank you so much, Dolly. We do have a question in chat. Do you have any suggestions on how to remove poison hemlock?
Yeah, I just bought a tool that helped me do that. We did that at one of our gardens in town in Munster. It's a tool called Grandpa's Weeder, and it's one of those tools that is on a small handle and you shove it down the ground and it grips that taproot, and then you lever it up and it pulls the taproot out. Works really effectively. If you have a lot of them, you might want to just use a potato fork or some other kind of small pitchfork type of tool to sort of push them up out of the ground, if that makes sense. You have to get the whole taproot to get rid of poison hemlock. But Grandpa's Garden Weeder worked really well last week when I used it for the first time, especially in moist soil like after a rain.
Can you talk more about your plant sale, Dolly? There's a question about what plants you will have and what your hours are.
Sure. I grow mostly native plants. I grow a few annuals and a few non-native plants. Everything is for pollinators. I grow everything from seed with exception of a few things. I buy in a few things. And so I have lots of varieties of milkweed, different varieties of milkweed. I have different varieties of the keystone plants like asters, coreopsis, and goldenrod. And then I have a lot of other little specialty things. I think I have a friend who's going to be able to give me several passion flower vine starts to sell and other interesting things that I have. I have our native lupin, and this year for the first time I'm going to be able to sell purple prairie clover because I bought in 2 flats. And I'm going to sell something called pussy toes, which is a little tiny ground cover, a native ground cover plant that is the host plant for the American lady butterfly. And there was an American lady butterfly at my house yesterday laying eggs on the flat of plants that I haven't even potted up yet. So doesn't matter how small the plants are. Sometimes the butterflies just need somewhere to put their eggs. My plant sale will be from 10 to 5 on May 30th through June 1st. And then I have an open weekend every month until September 30th. So if you get on my email list, you can email me. I'll put you on my email list. And then you get notifications of those open weekends. In between the open weekends, we do by appointment. So you can come and shop by appointment.
All right. Well, once again, thank you so much, Dolly. We appreciate you taking the time and sharing all this information.
Bye-bye, everybody. Thank you.